Hello friends, my name's Real Emile and welcome back to Forza Motorsport Top Gear Laps. Now we are in Forza 4 today for a bit of a special episode. Now Forza 4 laps don't work too differently from the Forza 5 ones. Again, cars are set 6 laps. However, there are a few limits and restrictions I'm putting on this. The big one is class restrictions. Now this Noble M600 is an R3 car. It did go around the track. It went round in 1:14.253, which is the fourth fastest car we've had round. R3 is the equivalent to S-Class in Forza Motorsport 5, so this car rivals a bunch of R-Class cars in that game, which would be X-Class cars in this game, if that makes any sense to you. So yeah, we're limiting this to cars that are S-Class only, so that's why you won't see any super hyper machines go around. Unless, of course, we get to the point where, you know, we fancy throwing around some of these hyper machines and seeing what they can really do. In which case, we shall be doing that. But until then, this is sort of going to remain a series for the slower vehicles. Or not too much slower, but S-Class vehicles. Anyway, we start today with the Vauxhall Astra VXR. This is the 2006 model. I don't mind this Vauxhall Astra actually. I'm not a huge fan of Vauxhalls, as you may know, but the Astra VXR isn't particularly a bad car. I think it's a fairly decent looking car. And the new one is also actually a really nice looking car as well. This has 240 horsepower, which is an awful lot going through the front wheels. And it doesn't deal with it very well. If you've seen any real life road tests on this car, or indeed the Vectra VXR, you'll know these things are horribly understeery and torque steery, and this one's no different. There is quite a lot of understeer in the Astra, but 240 horsepower, it's pretty decent in a straight line, and I've got to say it's extremely cheap. This car, 15,000 credits for a high-end C-Class hot hatch isn't too bad when you consider the Renault Clio RS, which is 10 PI lower, costs 2.5 times more than that. So anyway, coming up here, yeah, again you can hit about 110, 120 in this. It's not the fastest car in the world, admittedly. If this was in Forza 5, it'd be just into C-Class, I believe, and around there. Fairly uneventful looking, but that was a lot harder to get around than it looked. So I figured let's use another hot hatch to compare that time to, and I figured it would be a bit different and use something a bit more out of the box. So I went with this, the Vauxhall Cupra R. There's a few reasons I went for this. One, it's a car I actually quite like. I do really like the Vauxhall Leon. And two, I believe this is 1 PI higher than the Astra, or it might be 1 PI lower. It's one way around either way. I do know, however, this has around 220 horsepower. And this is the 2003 model, and it deals with its power really well actually. I was definitely surprised by this car. I have driven it a few times, mostly in upgraded form, but I've never driven it stock, and it's actually a pretty decent vehicle stock. There's no real huge issues I have to comment on the Cupra. It's also extremely cheap, this car. This is 10,000 credits. 10,000 credits for a high C-Class hot hatchback. This car's an absolute steal. By far and away one of the best value cars in Forza 4 in my opinion. It's a really nice car to drive this. I do like it an awful lot. And in a straight line, it's not too much of a disadvantage to the Astra. Through the corners it's better than the Astra, and down the straights there's virtually no difference between these two, so out of the two, that's what I'd definitely go with. Now, I was looking through cars to see what we could use as an A-Class, B-Class style car, and I saw this and thought, yeah, why not? This is the Bentley Platinum Motorsports Continental GT. It has the most ridiculous body kit I've ever seen on anything ever. I do quite like it, but it's, oh god, it's so utterly insane. Speaking of insane, it has 703 horsepower, which is an awful lot. It also weighs an awful lot. I think this exceeds £5,000. The body kit weighs an awful lot. Now, 700 horsepower in what is a mid-A class car is, well, it's very impressive. And then I looked at the Continental Supersport, which is right next to this on the car rankings, and that's a few PI higher and has 130 less brake horsepower. Yeah. And this car does not get stopped. Brakes are a bit of an issue, or rather a huge issue, and the understeer is also a big factor. Four-wheel drive is very nice. It can actually put its power down pretty well, which is good. And yeah, it's a fairly okay-ish car to drive. It feels heavy. It costs a ridiculous amount of money. 550,000 credits for this car, which is insane. But it wasn't that bad, the Continental, I've got to be honest. So I figured I'd find a rival for that too, and I came up with the Aston Martin V12 Vantage. Now, after driving the Continental GT, I was a bit surprised by this one. The Continental GT basically feels like driving a mini Veyron. This feels like driving a super powerful go-kart. This really is a very lively vehicle, which I wasn't really expecting from the Aston, but at the same time I kind of was, but I wasn't when I was just driving the Bentley, if that makes any sense. The Aston V12 Vantage is actually a really nice car. I do quite like it. And yeah, it's a pretty decent car around here. I do have to admit, after driving Bentley, I sort of got used to four-wheel drive and huge amounts of power. And this does have a pretty big sizable amount of power. I'm not quite sure on the exact figure. But the rear end comes out on this a bit more than the Bentley. But of course, the transverse of that is this has no understeer. It's a pretty nice car to drive this. It's also half the price of the Bentley, 270,000 credits only. Yeah, it's not the cheapest car in the world, but it's definitely one of the more prettier cars in the world. And round the final corner, pretty non-drama-ish lap. Now we come on to the original, the daddy, the Pagani Zonda. This is the original Zonda from 1999, the C12. I was looking through cars to use, and this fitted the bill of supercar quite well. And I've never actually driven this car in Forza 4. And I've got to be honest with you, it's lovely to drive this car. This is, wow. I was so surprised by the Zonda. I've driven the, as I get it drifting around there, yeah. It was really controllable around there though. I've driven the Huayra around here before, and that was a very quick car, but the control was a bit odd on it. This was planted. It really was planted, this car. It was fantastic. It almost felt like driving one of the bigger GT 500 race cars in this game. It's awesomely stuck to the road, this. Fantastic straight line speed, as you'd expect from a Zonda. That 7.3 AMG Mercedes engine does sound absolutely fantastic as well. You could pretty much keep it flat out through there. It's just so controllable. And yeah, this is definitely a fantastic car. 320,000 credits isn't too much to ask for it either, to be honest with you. Yeah, definitely go and give that Zonda a try. Now, for this, I wanted to make it a bit interesting. So, the Zonda and this were actually featured on, I believe, the first episode ever of Top Gear. So, I figured I'd compare these two. Now, in the actual show, I believe the Zonda won and the Murcielago did it in the wet. But, of course, there's no rain in Forza 4, so they both get tested on the same track in the same conditions. The Murcielago, as much as I do absolutely love the Murcielago, I actually love it more than the Zonda. I've got to be honest, it isn't the best car to drive around here. It does feel awful heavy. The Zonda feels light without flinging its rear end out all the time. This just feels heavy. And it kind of is. I believe it's actually quite a few PI lower than the Zonda as well, which isn't particularly good. Strangely enough, this is actually lower PI than the Gallardo, which I was quite amazed to find out. But not the best car to drive around here, but by far and away not the worst I've ever had. It was fairly decent. It was quick in a straight line, probably quicker than the Zonda in a straight line. And it also got its power down well because of the four-wheel drive system. pretty good car to drive around here, actually. I've got to be honest. I did quite like the Murcielago, but it did just feel a little bit heavy. And we finish off with something very interesting. This is the first electric car we've ever had around our track. I don't believe there's any electric cars in Forza 5, and if there was, I probably wouldn't use them because it would probably be a Nissan Leaf. This, however, is an electric car I like, which is strange. There's not many of them. This is the Tesla Roadster. This is basically a Lotus with a bunch of batteries welded to it. So, how does it drive? Well, it drives like a Lotus with a load of batteries bolted to it, which actually means it's quite good. It basically drives like a Lotus without all the twitchiness. It's pretty good. Straight line speed isn't its forte. It can do 140 before it tops out. It's also an electric car, which, for some strange reason in Forza, I'm not quite sure if this is actually how electric cars work or not, but it has one gear. I'm not joking. So, yeah, there is some advantages and some disadvantages to that. Around the Hammerhead, it's not quite as good as the other cars. It's not as quick out there because, of course, the engine starts at really low revs. However, during the second half of this course, this is where it starts nailing it back. For these final two corners, I often struggle with what gear to use around here, but considering I have no choice in this, it's just plain and simple. Just throw it round. And yeah, the Tesla was actually fairly decent to drive around here. I quite like the Tesla. On to the times, and it's not surprising that Zonda's the quickest car we've had out today, with a 1:17.881. A couple of milliseconds off a rough RT12, which was a fairly quick car, and faster than a GTR, proving that old supercars can be faster than the newer supercars. Lamborghini Murcielago with 1 minute 18.221. It only just managed that on its final lap with me. It was getting 119s. The Murcielago isn't the fastest car around here, but I did quite like the Murcielago. And it's a damn sight cheaper than the Zonda, actually. I forgot to mention that. And it's only 120,000 credits, I think. In 20th, we have the Aston V12 Vantage, 121.599. Fairly decent time from the V12 Vantage, I've got to be honest. It was quite a nice car to drive. The Bentley goes in with a 122.573, being 500 milliseconds slower than a Corvette C7 Stingray. Yeah, it had a few issues with braking. But overall, actually, I've got to be honest, the Motorsport wasn't too bad. The Tesla goes in at a 123.444, getting beaten by a Shelby GT500, but beating a BMW M5, which is a pretty impressive time. So, yeah, an electric Lotus can beat a big four-door heavy sedan. Yeah, I shouldn't describe it that way. The Leon Cupra goes in at a 129.121, which is really quick for that sort of car. A lot quicker than the Scirocco R, thank God. And we have a new loser. We have something that's actually at the bottom of the board that isn't a Golf R for the first time in history. The Astra VXR goes in with a 130.614. Yeah, the understeer sort of killed that for it, unfortunately, so the Astra wasn't particularly fast around here. Anyway, friends, I want to thank you all very much for watching, and until next time, farewell.